This is the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the podcast series on power sector leaders, we're going to talk to Blaine Collison, Executive Director of the Renewable Thermal Collaborative, which represents stakeholders working to decarbonize the production of heat energy. He's going to talk about the collaborative's role in the considerable challenge of developing clean heat energy in industry and in other hard to decarbonize economic sectors. Blaine's headed the collaborative for almost 7 years. He began his over 3-decade career in policy as a congressional staffer before spending nearly 18 years helping guide the Environmental Protection Agency Energy Start programs, RIP. He's also a senior executive with energy consultant David Gardner and Associates. Blaine, tell us about the Renewable Thermal Collaborative. What are its history and goals, and what is its current membership?
Oh, yeah, great question. Thank you for having me. So the RTC was formed in 2017, and we are formed sort of out of some of the lessons learned from the voluntary renewable electricity experience, right? And you alluded to some of my background. I spent 15 years doing voluntary renewable electricity work, both at EPA and in the private sector. And so, we look at that, look at the progress we've collectively made on PPAs, right, and third party finance and all that. It's terrific, amazing. The Clean Energy Buyers Alliance just had their spring summit and announced more than 100 gigawatts in completed voluntary C&I renewable electricity deals in the U.S.
Oh, I think WRI, World Resources Institute, was involved in those early efforts, weren't they?
Yeah, so SEBA was REBA, and then before it was REBA, it was the BRC, and that effort was co-convened by 4 NGOs. And let's see if I can remember. So WRI, World Wildlife Fund, Rocky Mountain Institute, and I am suddenly blanking on the fourth, and I apologize to them for not being able to remember.
Ah,
But
sometimes,
so, I mean that.
but the idea was voluntary, meaning that corporate buyers who use a lot of electricity, large electricity users, would were not compelled by any sort of mandates, government mandates, or anything like that. They just set their own goals to buy renewables to help move the industry along, right?
Yeah, and that's right. With even a little bit of a sweetener here, in that some of those founding companies actually wanted to go buy renewables as a business strategy, right? For
Right.
cost stability, right? And they couldn't get it. They started by approaching their incumbent energy suppliers, utilities, and saying, "Hi, listen, we'd like to buy wind and solar. Would you sell that to us?" And they got a lot of no's and thought, well,
Yeah.
that we actually have a business objective here. All right, let's figure out collectively how we can deploy our market power to accelerate the sector. So
Is that what led you to the Renewable Thermal Collaborative? Is that people were able to buy clean electricity, but suddenly you noticed that they weren't able to buy clean heat? Is that what
uh,
happened?
spot on. Yeah, a lot of these companies have been working on their electricity objectives and scope 2 emissions. And then long about 2017, 5 companies and one US city said, all right, this has been amazing, right? We've made all kinds of progress on the scope 2 thing, but we all make stuff, right? I mean, it was companies like
Right.
Mars and Procter and Gamble and General Motors. We all make stuff. We use a tremendous amount of heat to do it. That's how we make things. Uh,
Right.
and mostly globally, here in the US, we get that heat by combusting fossil gas. And so all of those companies, they have climate objectives. Listen, we don't know what to do about this, right? We've been working on wind and solar. Great, amazing. We're not done yet, but we sort of have a plan. We don't know what to do about this. And frankly, anybody else who makes anything or who has a large portfolio of buildings like a campus or a healthcare system, they're going to have these same questions. We got to figure this out. could we
Yeah.
take some of those same approaches that we've used on the scope 2 side and start to work the scope 1 problem? And here we are.
Before I want to get to that, what were your early efforts in producing, helping decarbonize the production and use of heat energy? And I want you to explain what the challenges are there. But um, just real quickly before we move on, that was where the Renewable Thermal Collaborative started.
Yep.
What are your current goals right now, and who makes up your membership?
Oh, good question. Yeah. So starting with 6 members in 2017, we now have I was looking at this yet 52 members. They are global industrials, healthcare systems, some university systems and cities, a couple of states, US states. Mostly our members are global industrials with operational footprint all over the world. They are joined as RTC participants by a group of more than 60 solutions providers, right? So these are the technology developers and innovators, project financiers, utilities, consultants, NGOs, right? So what we've done here is built a collaborative that supports peer-to-peer exchange on the buy side, and then the sort of pre-commercial relationships and collaborations actually out in the market in the world to deploy
Right.
stuff, right? Because all these companies are trying to figure out which technologies do we use in which facilities, in what order, with whom do we partner, how do we pay for, how do we support and deploy a multi-year strategy to go from wherever we are to net zero or our science-based target or whatever it is. And it's a
Perfect.
it's a complicated question.
Yeah. So let's start. Let's break that down just a little bit. I want to talk soon about the range of solutions and the
Yep.
range of industries that are using those solutions. But just to get us some perspective, what has the collaborative done already? What about its past leadership in decarbonizing production use by industry of heat energy? Where did you start? What were the first ones? And then we can move on to what's happening now, because I know that you've got a much stronger grip on what the options are for different industries.
Yeah, that's a great set of questions there. Uh
Starting with
we
what you maybe where you started first. What were some of the first
yeah.
things
Well,
solutions?
some of the first things we've tried to do are to help folks understand sort of what this mix of technologies is, and how to think about the building blocks. One of the things, and this is actually a good resource to point folks to it. We worked with a consultant with BCG to develop something called the Renewable Thermal Vision Report. It's up on our website. It's free to the world, and this was an attempt to look at the industrial thermal emissions in the U.S. and break that down by sector, right? Because sectors are different. Food and beverage is different than chemicals, and then to take a look at the set of renewable thermal technologies. So things like electrification, heat pumps, solar thermal, uh, renewable natural gas, biomethane, hydrogen, thermal storage, right? And try to map these technologies across the emissions stack and sort of see, okay, really, collectively and by sector, how do we get from where we are to we were looking at this in the context of net zero by 2050. So really, how do these technologies stack and align and work together? But one of the interesting differences between thermal decarb and electricity, with electricity, it's really about scaling wind and solar and storage, right? And getting really good at those and doing the grid work. But wind and solar, the production potential from wind and solar is almost limitless, right? Particularly when we think about offshore and again, adding storage and doing the grid work. With thermal, uh, there is no true technology set that's going to take us all. It is a yes and conversation. We're going to electrify a ton of end use applications, industrial buildings, industrial, but we just can't. We don't have the time. There's not enough clean energy. There's not enough grid. we can't electrify everything, right? So companies are having to understand, I got to grab 2 or 3 or 4 techs. So that renewable thermal vision report was an attempt to give everybody a little bit of a roadmap to start thinking about this, and then thinking specifically about their operations and their objectives.
Let's get a little bit more concrete.
Yeah.
First of all, I want you to clarify something for our listeners. There are some forms of heat energy that can be very effectively produced by electricity. There are
Yes.
some that can't really like an electric heat pump can't get hot enough. That may be an oversimplification, but and I'd like you to clarify or correct me if I'm wrong. But you need other types of heat produced by other technologies. And so could you tie us to, you mentioned building electrification. Now, buildings can be heated by electric heat pumps, at
Yes.
least homes can. But what
Yep.
about the chemical industry or the steel industry?
Yeah,
Those also need a lot of heat,
they
and
do.
I assume electricity can't do that. Tell us a little bit about, tie specific industry to specific um, heat tech, decarbonized heat technologies.
Sure. Again, this is a spot on question. Uh, you're absolutely right. If you look at industrial thermal energy requirements, the breakpoints you see are by temperature, right?
Uh,
So the temperatures required in the steel, oil and gas refining, chemicals sectors, right? Those are high temperature applications. You need a lot of heat. You typically need it round the clock, right? Those facilities are operating 24/7. And if you sort of kick back to the other end of that continuum, you think about a sector like food and beverage as different, or pharma, or building as a group, right? Those are lower temperature requirements. Or you're cooking stuff, you're brewing beer, you're doing pasteurization and sterilization. You know, uh, the heavy emitting, hard to abate sectors, concrete, steel, chemicals, 900 degrees C and up. Some of those processes are 1300, 1500 degrees C and up. It's
uh,
hot.
that's like 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, right? 1,300 degrees C. That
Yeah, I mean
nine fifths, 9 fifths C plus 32. So basically double the C, and right?
it's an amazing amount of heat.
Yeah.
And so you were getting at this in your question. Uh, Industrial heat pumps shine in sort of low and medium, so below 400 degrees C, process applications. They're amazing. They're unbelievably efficient. They do a great, right. One of the places that we've been doing a lot of work, and we can talk about this, is around industrial heat pumps for so those low and medium temperature sectors. One of the pieces of innovation we're seeing in the market is more and more technology. There's some technology providers that are working on manufacturing heat pumps that can perform at higher and higher temperatures.
Oh, that's
Also, you have
interesting.
technologies like thermal storage, right? Heat batteries. And one of the things they can do really well is produce and store high temperature industrial heat. So part of what happens here in thermal decarb is you start to map the technologies a little bit to their end use applications, and there's a little bit of a calibration exercise, where again, a food and beverage company's solutions portfolio is probably going to look a little different than a chemical conglomerate's solutions portfolio, and that's great. There's something for everybody here, um, but it's an interesting part of the process.
So, just briefly, I want to move on to our last question, Blaine, but just briefly, can you tell us a little bit about those two portfolios, food and beverage versus what did you say? What was the other one? What are their
Chemicals is
chemicals? What are their portfolios? Just concretely, because we've had folks. I had somebody on last, it's probably about a year ago, that was heating brick. They've had these special
Yep.
brick materials that
Yep.
they held heat in. So just like I say, not to wonk out too much, but those two portfolios that you mentioned, give us an example of what those portfolios would be made up of. I guess they would
Sure.
start with heat pump action, maybe, or no.
Yeah, well, if so, one of the things we do at we've been running a lot of case studies at the RTC, right, highlighting projects out in the world, and I'm thinking quickly about the portfolio of case studies we've done around food and beverage companies. So we've seen a lot of heat pumps, a lot of solar thermal. We've seen a couple food and beverage companies using thermal storage, a lot of waste heat recovery, a lot of third-party finance to sort of bundle it all and pay for it. Um, we've got a case study on a company that's used renewable natural gas or biomethane for its decarb. Shifting a little bit to chemicals or that higher temperature set of applications. Uh, we collectively we've seen maybe a little less activity in the market there. So in part because it is harder, right? That said, we have chemical companies that are looking at thermal storage in particular, right? Because there's a lot to like about thermal storage. Storage for one, right, and its ability to produce
Yeah,
and distribute high temperature heat, uh,
whatever you need.
decarbonized molecules, right? As we look ahead, thermal storage, high temperature heat pumps, decarbonized molecules, I think is where we're going to. That's where the hydrogen piece, clean hydrogen piece, is going to land in those
Mm,
hard to abate. We're not going to heat buildings with clean hydrogen. We're going to reserve that and deploy that in hard to abate, high temperature industrial process applications.
yeah, yeah. I've heard that from a number of sources. Um, there's a great deal of conversation about clean hydrogen, and it's very clear that it has specific applications where it may be the only or at least the best solution. We're not really clear how that's all going to play out, and that's what you're doing. That is, you're working with all these private companies, all these technology providers, and I know that throughout my journalism career, people talk about the need for lessons learned. You're sharing the lessons learned. So out of this, um, you go into what right now is an incredibly dynamic political environment,
Yeah.
and it's hard to know what's possible, what's not. What kind of policy concerns do you have? What kind of policies could help the collaborative move forward on discovering solutions and solution portfolios?
Yeah, this is very much a three-legged stool, right? We work at the intersection of markets, technology, and policy. All three of those legs of the stool, excuse me, those levers. We like to talk about levers. All three of those levers have a role to play, and all three of them can benefit each of the other two. So we saw there was some pretty interesting policy in the previous administration. Incentives, cost sharing with really interesting private sector cost sharing commitments and leveraging.
Mhm.
So federally, we're working to see if we can preserve some of the key tax credits and grants, like 48C, 45X. The Industrial Decarbonization Demonstrations Program at DOE was really interesting. This is uh, in some ways, this is industrial policy, right? And this is U.S. industrial resilience policy, and
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you start to apply that lens, and the value proposition really pops. And then you and I were talking a little bit as we were getting started. State policy is a huge
Yeah,
part of the equation, right? Because as we think about utilities and utility policy and energy markets, a lot of that work happens at the state level. So we've got a set of priorities and ambitions there as well. And these two things will continue to mutually reinforce each other and to reinforce and be reinforced by technology development and by the market digging in and trying to push a little further, a little faster.
interesting. Yeah, the previous administration really did have some interesting ideas about making clean energy solutions domestic. and
Mhm.
preserving those. A lot of people that we've had on the program, on the podcast, in the last few months have said that preserving some of those ideas that came out of the last administration that really do support energy security and the U.S. economy are worth looking at. And we're
Yes.
hoping now, as we make this podcast, I think I may speak for you. Correct me if I'm wrong. That we're hoping that the folks on the in Congress will think about those kinds of things.
Renewables are domestic energy supply. Renewables are good business, right? We are the RTC is centered around global industrials that are trying to do business better with renewables, right? They all come to this for the business value. They are viewing this as a business imperative, and that's a pretty powerful thing.
Yeah, yeah. And as I've told listeners in the past, I got into this whole field 2 decades or more ago when Tom Friedman of the New York Times used to say that green was the new red, white, and blue. But that's all the time we have, Blaine. I'm going to move on. I want to thank you. My guest has been Renewable Thermal Collaborative Executive Director Blaine Collison, and he's described the collaborative's work to decarbonize the production and use of heat energy in industry and about approaches in other economic sectors. I also want to thank our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.